Hello, and welcome back to the second portion of our curriculum design session. I would like to begin with a quick quotation from Katie White. Katie White says, "We must first clarify what we are assessing before we determine how best to do so." Um, I've talked a lot about test scores, and some of you might be thinking this is not a very forward-thinking professional development session. This guy still uses tests. Or I haven't talked about textbooks yet. I might talk about textbooks. And well, first things first is that this is not a session on creative vehicles for assessments. That's a whole nother set of sessions. And I think there are creative educators watching this or out there that you are capable of doing that. I'm here to help. I'm here to do what Katie White says. We're here to help clarify what we're assessing. If you don't want to use a test, that is your job. And I encourage you to do that. Find the best way to do so. But first, we have to find the goal. And just like, it's just kind of interesting because are tests and textbooks bad? You see, there's that educational ed tech company ditched the textbook, and often for good things. Like those are like, I would say, remember how I said I don't want an iteration or an alternative that's worse. But tests and textbooks, they're not bad. How they were used was bad. It was ineffective. And this is an aside, but like, it does make me think a little bit about teachers that are maybe using them in a creative, new, or thoughtful, or objective-minded, like focus on goals way, and they have to like defend themselves because of the shift that education has taken. The focus needs to be on solid learning and on solid goals. Hence why we're clarifying how best to do so. Yeah, that's your job. But don't just change how best to do so. Let's clarify what we're doing. That's why I say there's some teachers that are using what we'll call standards-based assessment or standards-based grading. It's not as effective. Like they might as well be better off using percentages. We have to keep our framework in mind. And that I know that's scathing, but I just don't want maybe I'm not getting defensive, but like I know people hear some of the language I use. I might use earn or score or something like that, where it's like that's not good learning language. And I'm like, I know, but like the point is the idea, right? Same with test. Oh, test. He said test, or he's talking about a math test. If we were getting caught up on those specific words, which I'm fine to have a conversation about language, and we need to change some language in education. But good grief, it's all about clarifying. That's where we're trying to get to. So without further ado, we're going to jump into the meat and potatoes of this session. And this is the roller coaster that may feel like you are upside down at some points because it might be frustrating or confusing. And then there might be some points where it's like the slowest roller coaster you've ever been on because it takes some time to clarify what we're assessing. And I just need your patience. Hopefully, like I've talked about how I'm convinced of this, and I hope that helps you buy in to observe what it is that we're doing, or to recognize what is important from this session. But yeah, I just ask for your patience. There's going to be a lot of curricular speak in this session. There's going to be a lot of I'm trying to think of curricular words that, and the curriculum is written in a way that, and it's supposed to be, that's like content neutral, task neutral, generic, or broad statements, so that it is, or at least the BC curriculum, so that it's open-ended. I'll try and translate that to the best of my ability, and I know it might be difficult, but I just want to invite you here for this session. Let's start with one more quotation, and then after I read this quotation, we'll jump into our process. So this is also from Katie White. Blending the desire for adventure with the need for clarity supports a softened edge. This is the same reason why knowing our learning goals empowers and reassures us at the same time. If we know where we will end up, it will give us so much more freedom to meander and explore the landscape on the way. When our destination is clear, we feel more able to experience missteps, take risks. I love taking risks, and imagine possibilities because there is reassurance that we will get to where we want to go in the end, our final destination. The alternative is much less palatable, starting with a wide open space and trying to measure discrete aspects of the landscape of possibility is very challenging for both the teacher and the learner. Instead, we start with a target and then open up the learning space as wide as desired and necessary. Ooh, I love that. I'm sure you felt that way, starting in a wide open space. And this is where some people say, you're just talking about backwards design. I'm talking about a very specific type of backwards design, but you're right. If you've ever tried forwards design, that's difficult. It's wide open space. You don't know where you're going. Here, we're setting a pinpoint target or final destination, and we are going to undergo the process that Katie White calls clarifying proficiency. And hopefully, it will offer more clarity than percentages had previously with this new form for curriculum design and eventually assessment. So to do so, I'm going to walk you through the entire creation of a learning continuum. Okay, you'll hear me say that a lot. A learning continuum is like a document that is like, some of you might call it a unit of study or like a unit plan. That's another language thing. Like I know there's some people that are on board with standards-based grading, and they don't want to hear things like learning unit plan. Learning continuum, it should be. And I'll use that language, but just for translation's sake, it's basically a map or a learning map of what it is that you're going to be teaching your students. And it's very important. So we're going to start with curricular documents and then make our teacher-focused learning continuum. And then in future sessions, we'll look at how to bring in the student part and the student perspective. But clarifying proficiency, eventually we will be exploring the goal, building readiness, and in our next session, we will be enriching understanding. So without further ado, let's jump into something that you've probably seen before, some curricular documents. Now, these sessions are meant for BC teachers, but if you're not familiar with the BC curriculum, here's just a screenshot from the website of the Math 8 curriculum. And you'll notice that it's divided into numerous sections. There are sections called core competencies, big ideas, curricular competencies, and content. Now, let's begin with the core competencies, which are not pictured here. The core competencies they're the idea that by the time students finish high school or finish K-12 education, they can communicate, collaborate, think creatively, think critically, be personally responsible, be socially responsible, and demonstrate a positive personal and cultural identity. We've created umbrella terms for all of those things, and they're called communication, thinking, and personal and social. The core competency, they're skills, but this is the capital C curriculum part of our BC curriculum. And you'll notice that there are other competencies as well. These are called curricular competency. They're on the left-hand corner. The curricular competencies, I once heard explained, I forget by who, as they are the core competencies contextualized. So where students are meant to communicate, think, and be personally and socially responsible in Mathematics 8, that is the curricular competencies. So these are skills that students are meant to accomplish. It says students are expected to be able to do the following when they finish Mathematics 8. And BC is very skill-based. So we are encouraged in BC to teach to the left column, okay? That the idea that a lot of content can be Googled nowadays. Content's important, but we need students to leave with skills. On the right column, you'll find content, and that's what students are expected to know. And in other curricular documents, you'll find skills that also already have content embedded. That's not the case in BC. So we have to pair things up, and I'll show you how I do that. Some BC educators might not even know how best to do that. I'm just going to show you my process. I think it might be a bit enlightening. This does allow for a form of agency with mathematics teachers. You get to decide in what regard the competencies connect with the content and how it fits best. So there's a creativity and agency, and also like a trust, which is really cool in British Columbia. The British Columbia curriculum is fantastic in that regard. And then at the top, teachers are reminded of big ideas that are sometimes called enduring understandings. This is what students should understand when they leave their Mathematics 8 class at the end of the year. So as my colleagues and I were planning our unit, we were looking at the content, and we were trying to figure out how to do our first year of teaching Mathematics 8. And eventually, the content piece that came up was numerical proportional reasoning, rates, ratios, proportions, and percents. And you can see there's elaborations underneath there. So it's important. The students need to know proportional reasonings, rates, ratios, proportions, and percent. And you'll remember that I said teachers in British Columbia are meant to teach to the left. So my colleague and I, we were tasked with the idea of, well, what skill fits best with this content? And let's just take a look at the document one more time. This is a screenshot. Those competencies go on for a long time, and it's pretty overwhelming. And I know there are some teachers that think, how am I going to assess them all? And should my report card, if I'm supposed to be goals-based, have every single curricular competency? Both of them is a hard no. Don't do either of those ideas. The truth is that not all competencies are created equal. All students need to be able to do it, but not all you shouldn't assess them all. Bear with me. Here's the idea. So here's three, I wrote them down, competencies that I think can help us understand this. So the first one, this is just a bit of BC curriculum lingo, just so we understand. The first one says demonstrate and apply mental math strategies. Okay. Here's one that says apply mathematical understanding through play, inquiry, problem solving. Third one, use tools or technology to explore and create patterns and relationships and test conjectures. These three skills, these are just three that I pulled out. These are what I call involuntary competencies. These, it may not be in your classroom, but in my classroom, these happen by being in my classroom. So for instance, mental math, we use mental math all the time. I do a lot of work at whiteboards and in random groups using rich tasks, and that requires them to do a lot of mental math and to engage and apply their understanding through play, inquiry, and problem solving. And then finally, the last competency was about using tools and technology. Often there will be a time where someone will have a solution. I'll say, open up Desmos. Let's see if that linear relationship actually falls in line. Maybe if the line you've plotted is what we were looking for. Or on top of that, we could say, pull out a calculator. Those are things that are just going to happen. And in good manner. It's not like, oh, just check, covered that, because that's another thing teachers are maybe it's not the best practice to say I've covered something. Just because you've done it just doesn't mean they've learned it. But they're things that are constantly happening. So I'm going to start to look for a competency that is one that I actually need to get my students to wrestle with and engage with. Okay, this when looking at proportional reasoning. So this is the competency that stood out to my colleague and I. We thought about, and this kind of came from another thinking of a number of other things, but we thought about making scale models or proportional models. And this competency says model mathematics and contextualize experiences. And modeling, this is why curricular language is so broad. Modeling doesn't need to be building. We thought about building, and that's what we ended up doing. But if we wanted to, you could act it out. You could use concrete materials. You could use manipulatives. You could draw pictures. You could build buildings or programming. That's diagrams. All of those things are ways to model mathematics and contextualize experiences. Now, you'll notice also that there's the curriculum just makes me laugh because mathematics and contextualized experiences. Like, could you write something more annoying to read? And it's going to come up a lot, you guys, as we write this continuum. But like, we need to recognize that there are ways that we can play with this competency to make it a bit more understanding. And the way that we do that is we use something called learning targets. So let's take numerical. So we're talking about proportional reasoning, okay, and modeling, okay. Forget the lingo that we don't need. Let's find a way to put them together in a learning target. So learning targets, there's I've seen two really good ways to write them. So this is our final destination goal. Remember, we're clarifying proficiency. This is where we have to get to. Students need to model mathematics in a contextualized experience, and they need to use proportional reasoning. The best targets are written as I can statements, and that's what I'll use. So it would read something along the lines of, I can model, well, we could just use the competency, I can model mathematics and contextualize experiences. What some teachers don't know is I can remove, anytime that you see the words mathematics or ideas or something like that in the competency, because you're using the content, we don't ever get rid of the content in BC, we use it. So we could replace that word mathematics with proportional reasoning. I can model proportional reasoning in contextualized experiences. And the word contextualized experiences, it's just trying to keep it open-ended. There's lots of different places that you can model proportional reasoning. So that's even what you could start to think of. I can model proportional reasoning. That's what we want students to do. That's the final destination. But every learning target needs description or definition. So we say, I can model proportional reasoning. This means that I can ... And then we can start to describe, well, what does it mean? Like, what do you need to accomplish? What do you need to have done to say, yes, I can do that. You're proficient. I can do that goal. And that's the first task. That's clarifying proficiency. We have our goal. Well, this means that I can. Just a side note, you can also write learning targets in this format. I think it's also a good format. You could say, I'm learning to model proportional reasoning, and I'm successful when I can. Because that means this is called success criteria. So I'm successful when I can do this, this, and this. That means that I've learned how to model proportional reasoning. Let's take a closer look at what we've written here. So here we have our content, specifically from the curriculum. We have our competency, specifically from the curriculum with all that jargon. And then we have the target. I can model proportional reasoning in contextualized experiences. I've used the verb model, and I've taken a look at my Bloom's Taxonomy Teacher's Planning Guide, which I'll show you on the next slide. And I've identified that this is an application skill. Okay, this is important because when we define it, this means that we need to use other application words. We don't have definition yet, but let's move on to the next slide here. Every target needs a this means that, or I'm successful when I can. So the question becomes, how do we best define it? Because otherwise, proficiency will never be truly clear. And our whole goal is clarity. We've established that since the first session. Defining proficiency and increasing clarity is how we feel or avoid feeling boxed in or helpless. As Katie White said, we don't want to just be stuck defending a grade. We want to have our eyes set on the final destination learning target and what it means. So we need to know what type of target that this is. This teacher planning guide is just the best thing from planet Earth because it has so many curricular verbs under the section that says keywords. And I'm just going to move to the next section so you can see the application section more clearly. I had to do a bit of perusing through it, but I found the word model, and it's in the middle column here underneath application. That helps me understand. And you also, some of the verbs transcend different sections, but this helps me understand this is an application skill. Students need to know or comprehend proportional reasoning to be able to model it. Here's how it works, Mr. Dueck. Here, I can use it in a new situation, and so on and so forth. So when we know our key verb is model, we can look under application to see how we're going to define it. And this is the most difficult part of building a learning continuum. This means that, but it's also the most important because when students look at a rubric or they're looking at the end of the day like, oh, I apparently I didn't do this quite well enough. Like, let's say they're still developing in their understanding of modeling proportions. You can look at the criteria and say, well, you missed this. To do this, you have to be successful here, you have to be able to do this. And here's a piece where you missed it. So I'll begin looking for verbs in this section, and this can take lots of time, but I remember my colleague and I, we sat in Wordsmith and brainstormed. It's always good to have people to work with, and this is what we came up with. I'm going to go to the next slide now. So here's my target. This is what I want my students to do at the end of the day. I can model proportional reasoning in contextualized experiences. Eventually, that's going to mean I can model proportions using a proportional model. That's going to be really cool, or building a proportional model. But I can model proportional reasoning and contextualize experiences. And this means that I can identify a context where proportional reasoning can be modeled. This means that I can construct that identified context. This means that I can demonstrate how proportional reasoning is modeled in the identified context. And this means that I can calculate the modeled proportional reasoning with accuracy. This is I have one. Give me 1 second. Oh, I never thought that I would leave the microphone, but I'm in my classroom, so I might as well show you this. This is here is a contextualized experience where proportional reasoning was modeled. This is one of always keep examples from students. Now, this is task neutral, and it's supposed to be. If they want to act it out, or if you want a unit that acts it out, don't say anything about scale models. But we eventually made scale models. The student needed to identify a context where they could build a proportion. This kid saw the Space Needle, and he says, I think that's my context. I think I could use proportions if I made a scale model of that. Then they constructed it. And then on a separate piece of paper, they started to demonstrate how this model was proportional to the actual Space Needle, and they showed their calculations accurately. Once they had done all those things, I could use it almost like a checklist and start to say, hey, you could do this. But if I hadn't defined what proficiency is or clarified it, I have no idea if this is showing me that they can model proportional reasoning. Maybe they just made arts and crafts. There's a fantastic article by The Cult of Pedagogy on Grecian urns, about how Grecian urns are something they make when you study ancient civilizations, and they never teach you anything. Is this a Grecian urn, or is there a definition for what they're trying to do? So that's what this does. Identify context where you can show it, construct it, demonstrate the proportions, and calculate it well. That means you could do it. This means that you're successful. This means that. So we have to have, and it's really too bad because this is one area. Oops. This is one area where I remember how I said there's teachers that sometimes use this form of non-percentage standards-based, objectives-based focus, and it's missing something. This is often a piece that's missing. You'll have a learning target, and they'll assess it, and the kid has no idea why they are at a certain level of assessment or why they've been assessed a certain way because there's no criteria. Criteria doesn't always even need to be this long, but every I can needs a this means that. That is a must. So I tried to explain this well, but I went through it much quicker than this process takes. This is a long process. Going through verbs, thinking about what it means to do the target that you've accomplished. So find a colleague that you don't mind sitting beside and wrestle with this, okay? And then you'll be well on your way. This is definitely the most difficult part of this is clarifying proficiency. Most difficult part about building a learning continuum, changing our curriculum design so that we're moving away from percentages and point totals. Let's take a break. That was a lot. You might want to start looking, you might be motivated to look at some of your learning goals and see if they're defined well or how you can do that. Do it in a task neutral way, because the last thing you want to say is, well, I can model proportional reasoning and this means I can build a scale model. No. It has to be task neutral, because if the next year you don't want to build them and you want to act it out, you can use the same learning continuum. And if you use the same competency again throughout the year, you can measure it off of this, even if they didn't build something. They're still using that same verb. But that's an aside. When we return, we're going to look at other levels of Bloom's taxonomy, specifically when we are exploring the goal and building readiness, which are the next two steps in building a learning continuum. So let's take a break. Go back if you need. Check out my notes if you need. Check out my appendix. The first appendix has loads of built learning continuums, which we will investigate in the next section. Okay, let's take a break. Okay, everybody, welcome back. let's start to build. I guess we've already started, but let's look at what it means to build a learning continuum. Just a reminder, a learning continuum is like a unit of study, and a reminder that before we can just ditch percentages, we need to augment our curriculum design so that we can then change assessment. If it's kind of like backward, it is backwards design. If we change the tail end, it's almost like cutting off the end of the snake. We have to start from the beginning so that we can make it to our final destination. So let's take a look. Here is a template for a learning continuum. This is a BC curriculum version of what Katie White has created in her 2017 book, Softening the Edges. For the purpose of this, I've had to augment it a bit in the PowerPoint or in this slideshow. But look at my first appendix and you will see plenty of examples. And you'll see the example that I've created. You'll see examples for other Math 8 learning continuums, as well as learning continuums for Mathematics 7 from a colleague of mine, Megan Churchill-Brown. The next slide is just going to change the size of this. I know you're reading the headings, so it might be more difficult to read, but it's just going to make the clarifying proficiency section a little bit more easy to read. There we go. Same template, different size. Now I'm just going to get rid of everything so that I can show you what it is that we have already done. So let's get rid of everything.